Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to NRW. I'm your host today, Rob the Movie Guy, and I thank you very much for joining me here today because today's review marks the 30-year anniversary of a Jean-Claude Van Damme classic, Lionheart. And this was a movie that had come out back in January 11th, 1991. And at that time, Van Damme was pretty much on a hot streak because just about every movie he had released in the late 80s, early to mid 90s was pretty much a box office success. And to many Van Damme fans, such as myself, this movie is considered to be one of his best in his filmography alongside films like Double Impact, Bloodsport, Kickboxer, Universal Soldier, and a personal favorite of mine, Street Fighter. And the film was directed by Sheldon Lettich, who at the time had great success in the action genre, and like Van Damme himself, he was on a hot streak in the late 80s and early 90s, but most of the success were coming from the films that were starring Jean-Claude Van Damme, such as Bloodsport, Cyborg, Lionheart, and Double Impact. I don't remember the time when I first saw this movie, but one of the earliest memories I do have of this film is that I remember liking the story better than I did the story in Bloodsport. I hadn't seen this movie in quite some time. I think it might have been 3 or 4 years ago since I last saw this movie, and when I saw this film in preparation for this review, I had forgotten a lot of the familiar faces there are in this movie. And one of those familiar faces is the actor Brian Thompson, who is one of those rare actors that gotten to work with the 3 top major action stars at that time: Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone, and of course Jean-Claude Van Damme. He had worked with Schwarzenegger in the first Terminator movie, nice jacket man, and then he worked with Stallone in the film Cobra where he played the Night Slasher, and of course he's in this movie with Van Damme where he plays Russell. And of course, we've also got the Kesey brothers, and I'm sure a lot of people out there may not know the brothers by names, but I'm sure when you guys see their faces, you might recognize them, especially with other films they've done with Jean-Claude Van Damme. So let's start off with the younger brother in Michel Kesey, who I believe now goes by the name of Mohamed Kesey, who in this movie plays the character of Mustafa, who's going after Van Damme in this movie, which I'll be getting into the plot synopsis later on. And in the movie Bloodsport, he was also featured as one of the fighters in the tournament alongside Van Damme. And if you're a hardcore Van Damme fan, you'll know the character of Tung Po, who was the main villain in the film Kickboxer. And of course we have the older brother in Abdel Kesey, who in the film plays the character of Attila, who is the main man that Van Damme has to beat in this movie in order to claim the big money prize at the end of the movie. And the other film that he worked with Van Damme was the movie The Quest, where he played the Mongolian fighter named Khan, which is the main guy that Van Damme had to beat in order to win the prize in that film as well. And one more actor I want to point out, because I know I'm getting a little sidetracked here, is in the actor Voya Gorik, who in the film alongside with the character of Mustafa has to search for Van Damme in this movie. But he plays a character alongside with Sylvester Stallone in one of my favorite action movies of all time, in Rambo First Blood Part 2, where he plays that big massive Russian guy. Alright, so now let's get into the plot. So the film follows the story of Leon, played by Van Damme, who in the movie serves in the French Foreign Legion, where he's based out of North Africa. And he receives a letter from his sister letting him know that his brother is dying from a drug deal that had gone bad in the beginning of this movie. And Leon asked his superiors to allow him to go see his brother in the United States, and his superiors had denied his request. So a little confrontation occurs. Leon manages to escape the base and heads over to his cargo ship that's heading out to New York City. So he gets to New York City, but he actually has to get over to LA because that's where his brother is located, but he has no way of getting there because he has no money and he's also an illegal immigrant. And along the way, Leon comes across an illegal street fight that is being run by a man named Joshua, whom he later befriends in the story. But he decides to volunteer to fight next because he realized he could win some money, and he defeats his opponent rather easily. This impresses Joshua so much that he wants to take him to this fight organizer for the rich elite by the name of Cynthia. So Cynthia becomes very infatuated with Leon and decides to sponsor him, and then dubs him with the name Lionheart. So there's a lot more that goes on with the story involving Leon leaving New York to go to LA after he tells Cynthia he's no longer fighting for her anymore. She tries to convince him that he can fight for her out in LA where he can make a lot more money. He still declines that offer. So now Joshua's involved because he's forced in a situation where he's got to get Leon to fight for Cynthia out in LA or else. And upon arriving in LA, Leon discovers that his brother had died before Leon even got to the United States, and also realizes that his sister-in-law is also in some serious debt due to the medical bills. And Leon gets a hold of his sister-in-law, Helen, trying to help her out in the situation that she's in right now with these medical debts, but she's holding him responsible for the death of her husband because according to her, he had abandoned his brother in the time of need, which resulted him in going to drugs, causing his death. And now Leon is forced to fight for Cynthia out in LA in order for him to get the money to help pay for the medical bills for his sister-in-law. And there, Leon discovers that the two French Foreign Legion officers are in LA to capture him to take him back to North Africa for him to get court-martialed. And like in New York, Leon is also winning all his fights out in LA for Cynthia, and along the way she discovers a secret about his dead brother, his sister-in-law, his niece, the medical bills, and because Leon is also rejecting all her advances, she starts to believe that Leon is having an intimate relationship with his sister-in-law. And now out of jealousy, Cynthia decides to set up and injure Leon in a rigged fight up against his most dangerous opponent in Attila, and along the way she gets the two French Foreign Legion officers to agree to allow this bout to happen, so that way he can lose the fight, she can gain all this money, and they can do whatever they want with him after the fight. And of course it doesn't happen. Leon does win the fight, ends up getting reunited with his family, and the story ends right there. So for me, Lionheart is one of those movies that when I watch it, I have a great time with the movie. Then after a while, I forget about the film. There are some details about the movie that I do forget. And then upon revisiting, especially for this review, there are a lot of things I had forgotten about what makes this movie so good. So let's talk about the positives. For me, the actors in this movie do a really good job with their performances. I really think that everyone in this film does give their best in this movie, and you can tell despite the fact there are some cheesy performances in the movie, but as far as the main actors in the film, everyone in my opinion does a really good job with their performance. And as far as the story is concerned, as I've already discussed in the plot, it's not very difficult to follow at all whatsoever. And one of the reasons why I connected with the story is because all the characters in this movie I absolutely adored, especially Leon, who is played by Van Damme, who does a great job with his performance in this movie. I understand there's a lot of people out there who will say that his acting abilities in this movie weren't all that great. I understand to be the case, but in my opinion, I look at how he's improved with his acting abilities in this movie, because I really think he did a good job with connecting all the other characters in this story. And you see in this film, Leon has a pretty rocky relationship in the beginning of this movie with Joshua, but as the story progresses, they start to form a really good, strong bond with one another. And you see that after everything they're going through with one another, they're still looking out for each other's best interests and looking out for each other's well-being. And of course, you also have Leon's sister-in-law, Helen, who in the beginning of the movie did not like the guy at all whatsoever. It had a lot of anger towards him, but with his efforts in trying to make things easier for her by paying for the medical bills, she starts to open up to him a little bit more and also warm up to him along the way, and realizes this is not the man that she initially thought of him as in the beginning of this movie. And for me, the secret ingredient to this movie is the relationship that Leon has with his niece, Nicole, played by the actress Ashley Johnson, who I think many of you guys may recognize her when you watch the movie The Avengers. She was that waitress that appears at the end of the film that was serving Captain America before that big battle sequence that happened towards the end of the movie. The relationship between Nicole and Leon is really one of the best things about this movie. This is really where everything comes together, because I don't think without this relationship between the two characters, I don't know if you'll have that same impact, especially when you get to the end of this movie, because once Leon does defeat Attila and gets all this money to give to Helen and of course his niece, he has to go back to North Africa to be court-martialed, but along the way he has to tell Nicole and his sister-in-law that he has to be leaving. He's no longer be able to stay with them because he has to go back and do his time. And then you get one of the most emotional scenes in the entire film. When you see Nicole cry, honestly, I still get a little bit teary-eyed. I've never cried in this movie, but I always get teary-eyed, and it has to do with her performance, but she is really good in this movie, as I've already said before. But that scene right there, you feel everything. I'm like, you feel the brokenness, you feel the sadness that's them being separated. Even though you know what's gonna happen at the end, I still get the feels for that movie in that scene because it is done so effectively. And of course, when the French Legionnaire officers decide to let Leon go because they had realized that all the stuff he had gone through, putting himself in danger like that just to help his brother's family, you can see that they were on his side and said, you know what, fuck it, just go. And then he leaves, and then he gets reunited with his family, and it ends up being one of the most beautiful endings to a film I had ever seen, especially in an action movie. And I gotta talk about the actor Voya Goric again, because he has one of the funniest scenes in the entire movie where he slaps Van Damme in the back of the head. I did not expect that to happen. I've seen this movie plenty of times, but for some reason I don't remember it. So when I saw this scene in the movie, I bursted out laughing so hard because that shit was so fucking funny.
Cover your head, Legionnaire!
Now, as far as some of my negatives are concerned, There are quite a few, especially now that I was realizing them more often in this review, because I came across some things that I did notice that stuck out for me, but for whatever reason, it just never really took me out of the film. In fact, that was part of the enjoyment factor for me, because I had grown up watching this movie, and even at that time, none of the negatives ever stuck out for me. And as I got older, they became very more apparent. But I still think this is a great movie. I will say this though about the negatives. The sticking point for me, believe it or not, is actually the action sequences, because they're really not all that spectacular. They're pretty bland. They're pretty tame for the most part. And there was really nothing memorable about the fight scenes that I can recall that stuck out for me. Even that fight scene at the end of the movie where Leon fights against Attila, nothing really spectacular happens, because Attila pretty much takes a beating and then he overpowers Leon rather, and doesn't defeat him at the end of the film, because we all knew what the outcome was going to be. But even with that being said, I still did not find the fight scenes to be that exciting at all. Believe it or not, the best things about this movie were just the characters and the story itself. The action scenes were just okay for me personally. And I almost forgot to mention one more negative before I get into my ratings. I do think that the score in this movie is rather cheesy. I still think it helped with the charm factor that this film does have for me, but it is actually, I think, one of the weakest part of this movie. The score is not very good in my opinion, but I didn't hate it. I just actually thought it was kind of funny. A little over the top in my opinion, but nonetheless, I think it worked in the context of this movie. So for my final thoughts, I do think this is one of Van Damme's best. I do love this movie. I think this movie has a great story, wonderful characters, and even though it does have a lot of cheesy factor in this film, I think it works as part of its charm. So for my rating, I would give this movie a raise the glass. So if you have seen this movie, let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. And if you haven't done so already, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because there's a lot of great projects that we're all working on right now that we cannot wait to show you guys for you guys to enjoy. So make sure you also hit that notification button while you're down there as well. And also follow us on our social media accounts. We have a Facebook and Instagram page at New Release Wednesdays, and on Twitter at the NRW. And you can follow myself on my social media accounts. On Instagram, Rob_Medina0585. On Twitter, RobMedina0585. And on Facebook, simply just Rob the Movie Guy. And until next time, everybody, thank you very much for joining me here today. Stay safe out there, and remember, cheers.